Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is the host of Forbes' Eye on Iowa, Sarah Muller. Sarah, thanks for coming on in.
Thank you very much. We had a jam-packed weekend, so we've got a lot to break down.
I am excited to talk about that. On Friday night, I did get a text from you that said, we need to talk about what happened at the Lincoln dinner. So before we get into what happened, can you describe for us and set the scene, what is the Lincoln dinner?
The Lincoln Dinner is essentially the biggest GOP event in Iowa every 4 years. They bring in a ton of GOP speakers, specifically candidates, to talk to potential voters, but not only that, but donors. They're really looking for donors at this event. And so I think they said we had 13 speakers at this event, and they all give their kind of 10-minute spiel. Then they get off stage, and after all of that, they have these reception rooms that people can kind of filter into and get to meet the candidates, have a beer with them. There were beers had, and drink and eat and just talk politics. And so I got to go and enjoy some of those speeches and also talk about with some of the voters what they're looking for.
Let's break it down. What were some of the themes you saw when the candidates went on stage? Tell us about that.
So I think there are a couple standout moments. First of all, the most noteworthy moment was Will Hurd getting booed off stage, which was kind of interesting because there were a couple people making some slight slams at Donald Trump, but he was the most blunt about what he was saying. He's obviously not a Donald Trump fan. He hasn't been for almost all of the time that Trump was in office. And so he had gone up on stage, and towards the end of his speech, he said something along the lines of Donald Trump is not running for those voting for him. He is running to stay out of prison. And it got a whole round of boos, and he quickly got off stage after that. And so that was the most substantial moment from the night. Then we had Nikki Haley kicked off the evening by calling out what happened with Mitch McConnell this last week, his freeze in front of the press when he was giving a press conference, and talking about term limits and the mental well-being of some of our legislators. That was followed up by some jokes. It kind of felt like there was this rolling joke thing going on where somebody would make a joke in their speech and the next person to come on would make another joke off of that. And so Asa Hutchinson got on stage after her, and she had mentioned, Biden not knowing how many grandchildren he had. And Asa Hutchinson said, I know how many grandchildren I have. I've got 7, and you can put that on the record. And so there was just kind of this rolling attitude of jokes. And so when Will Hurd got booed off stage, Francis Suarez said this is an easy act to follow. And he was right. I mean, how do you follow up after that? And so there's a lot of different tonal things happening that night.
Let's talk about after, because obviously the moment that Will Hurd got booed, that went viral. You and I have both talked to Will Hurd, and both times he's talked to us, he has, in no uncertain terms, has really criticized the former president. Afterwards at the reception, what was that vibe like with Will Hurd?
I actually didn't spend any time with his campaign afterward. I had a couple other campaigns to go check out, but I think they were kind of, let's regroup and see how we should handle this now. But actually, he's leaned into this. This moment's gone viral. He's retweeted the moment and said, I'm not going to lie to the American people. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The truth is hard to hear. And so he's leaning into this. He's not shying away at all. And he never really has. When you and I have spoke to him, he has mentioned Trump being a bully, being, not good for the American people. And honestly, looking at his platform, if the GOP wants moderate voters, Will Hurd is going to be a very good candidate for that. But we also have numerous candidates calling out Donald Trump. So I'm just kind of curious how this is going to resonate because it was so blunt versus some of the other kind of shots fired that night, that he's kind of seen as the very anti-Trump person, but yet other people can make comments. I'm just kind of curious how this is going to shake out given all of the context there.
The crowd obviously didn't like that comment, but what was resonating with the crowd? Any themes? Any person in particular? Tell us about the crowd.
Well, the big interesting one was Vivek Ramaswamy did very, very well. He's obviously been polling fairly decently, surprisingly, but everybody I was talking to after the event was saying how they were surprised by him. He had a lot of interesting energy on stage. He did get a standing ovation. There was a lot of not necessarily bashing on his part, but he definitely was giving into the anti-woke ideology that he has been the primary platform he's been standing on. Another one has been DeSantis. DeSantis had a very interesting approach. I have now heard him speak multiple times, and each time he has been very defensive in how he's approached his speeches, very anti-Trump, anti-Biden, making slams here and there. Whereas this time he took way less of approach that way. It was very much focused on his platform, making general kind of slams to the Democrats, but not necessarily slamming one person. It was a lot more positive of a speech. And I think he has to do that given his current place in the polls and how he's been decreasing his staffing. And we've been seeing kind of this pullback from him. So I think he's kind of pivoting right now, and it is necessary for his campaign. Other than that, Donald Trump kind of fell flat. It was a little bit surprising. He didn't come out with a lot of energy. And even though people still enjoyed his speech, a lot of what I was hearing after the fact was people being like, I'm surprised how he didn't really come out and get us excited. I'm surprised that he didn't feel very energetic. And so I don't know what that means exactly for his campaign here, but I know that there were Trump supporters there that night that were kind of disappointed.
I do want to talk about Trump, but first, let's just roll it back to DeSantis. And you did mention that his campaign is going through a bit of a restructuring right now. They laid off a third of the staff last week, according to reports. And so you're seeing that there is this sort of strategy shift based on the speeches that you have been able to attend. Is this resonating with the people in the audience?
I think it was really resonating with people given that he was supposed to be Donald Trump without the baggage, right? And for a very long time, he's been taking a lot of shots at Donald Trump, kind of going tit for tat and not focusing on the policy and focusing on the issues. And so now to see him pivot and take this more positive approach and take this more policy focused approach instead of trying to tear down other candidates, I think it's going to resonate better because we don't need Donald Trump 2.0 when we already have Donald Trump in the race, right? So if he's going to get that primary win, he really needs to take a slightly different approach than Trump, than taking the same, constantly tearing down other candidates approach. So I think this will work in his favor. I felt like people were talking positively about him afterward. So we'll see how that shakes out. But yeah, it seemed that they were responsive.
I do now want to talk about Donald Trump. You did mention that his speech sort of fell flat with the audience. When he walked out, the first line of the walkout song was, "One could end up going to prison." Talk to us about that. What was the reaction from the audience? Did it immediately resonate, or were people stunned? What did that look like?
Now, I'm going to be honest, they were playing the same songs multiple times in a row, and I was writing notes the whole time, so I didn't notice right away until after the fact. I don't know how much it resonated with people. It's also just a very well-known song. So I don't think it was intentional from where I was sitting, but I know his campaign was not happy about it. I think it's been interesting watching his speeches, given the fact that he's been focusing very much on his previous experience in office and not what he's going to do next time if he were to be elected in, and how he's going to change it to be different to be able to be voted in, given that he didn't win 2020. And that was what I was hearing from Trump supporters after the fact too, is he's focusing a lot on the past, and that obviously didn't get him reelected. So we need to figure out how we're going to get him elected in, given that he needs to kind of make a pivot, kind of like DeSantis did. So it's interesting because he's also making slams at DeSantis, still making the same comments over and over. And I'm not sure if it's resonating or not. Obviously, he's polling well, so I guess so. But, it's one of those things. Can he defeat the Biden administration yet again when he already couldn't in 2020?
Let's talk about those polls, because a new poll came out from the New York Times and Siena College, and it has him obliterating all of the GOP competition. His support is at 54%, followed by DeSantis at a distant 17%, and then the next few contenders are at 3%, and those are former Vice President Pence, Tim Scott, and Nikki Haley. So I'm really curious as to why is there this unwavering support for Donald Trump, despite him being indicted twice in recent months, and then he's just faced additional federal charges last week.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what's happening there, given the fact that we talked about this previously. If you're in the Trump camp, you're in the Trump camp. 3 additional charges are not going to change where you stand. I think that voters are definitely feeling like he might be the candidate that could beat Biden, but we have this whole deep bench of other candidates up for grabs too. But like I said, there's a lot of people who have been comparing other candidates to him. So like Larry Elder got on stage and said that he was a Donald Trump version, but he'll take that as a compliment. And even I talked to Perry Johnson after the fact. He wants to impeach Biden and pardon Donald Trump. So the way he was talking, I even asked him, you kind of sound like a fan. Like, why are you not voting for him given that you're running? And he said, well, I think he kind of messed up with the financial part of office. And so it's like they kind of support his administration, but just want to pivot a little bit with where they stand on the platform. So it's interesting to see these slightly different variations of Trump's platform being conveyed in different candidates, and seeing who could actually have the potential to beat. And we talked about this previously too, where Tim Scott, people like him, people really enjoy him, but they don't know if he has quite what it takes to beat Trump and to beat Biden. So I think that's the double whammy, is can this candidate beat not only the Biden administration, but just first of all, the Trump campaign.
When you were talking to people in the crowd, talking to voters, not just Trump supporters, but anyone, were they bringing up Trump's legal troubles at all?
Not really. I'm going to be honest. I did bring it up to them too. And I said, where do you think you stand on this? Where do you think this resonates in Iowa? And most of them said that it just didn't matter. I think people see this as a political stunt. They're not necessarily seeing it as a actual charge against him. And also when we have the Hunter Biden stuff happening parallel to this, it's very tit for tat, as I mentioned before, that we've got Hunter Biden being treated a certain way and then Donald Trump being treated a certain way. And so you're kind of comparing the two and saying, well, do they cancel each other out?
This was a big night in politics on Friday, and I'm curious, did anything surprise you? Do you see any dark horses emerging? Any trends we should keep our eye out for? What can you tell us?
Well, Ryan Binkley took his place on stage for probably the first time at the first major political event in Iowa. He was very interesting. I think, we have a lot of people running who don't have political backgrounds. And some of the people I spoke to after the fact said, just because you're a successful business person or you run a multi-million-dollar company doesn't mean that you're qualified for office in my mind, which is a super valid point, given that we have multiple candidates running who are wealthy or have never been elected, public servants before. So I think that's really being taken up in some Iowans' mind of, are you even qualified to do the job? If somebody had a resume in front of me and they didn't have all of the past experience that needs to be to take this position, that would be a big question mark in some of these Iowans' minds. But Vivek performed very well. I was very surprised to see how the audience responded to almost everything he was saying with a round of applause. Same with DeSantis, who did very, very well. Doug Burgum kind of came up out of nowhere and was performing well. But again, he took the stage and made an Iowa State, Iowa joke, which is kind of a little bit of a rivalry here. And, he's our neighbor to the Northwest. And so it was kind of a neighborly commentary that I think warmed people up. It's kind of that question of like, can you get an icebreaker to get the audience on your side? And there was a couple candidates that didn't do that. And there was a couple candidates that kind of gave their same stump speech they give every time, which I was a little disappointed of, given that, this was a fresh audience and this was a place to make a statement.
Well, Sarah Muller, what's next?
Well, what's next. We're headed to the Iowa State Fair in less than 2 weeks. We've got so much going on. I talked to Marionette Miller Meeks, Congresswoman Marionette Miller Meeks, and she represents Iowa, and she's hosted a lot of these candidates, and she gave some advice to them, saying get ready to have lots of FaceTime in lots of big groups of people. So, they can get on stage all they want, they can walk through coffee shops, but the Iowa State Fair is a whole different monster. So we will be there. We will have our fans and our sunscreen, and we will be going from event to event, covering all of these candidates who I spoke to, and they said they're really excited. So we'll see what comes out of it.
Well, I'm certainly really excited too. Yes, the next time the viewers see both you and I together, I will be in Des Moines with you on the ground. I cannot wait. Sarah Muller, thank you so much.
Thank you.